Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, Senior Tech Evangelist here at Dremio, and what I want to do is do a video demonstration of a blog that I just published, hands-on with Apache Iceberg on your laptop, deep dive with Apache Spark, Nessie, Minio, Dremio, Polars, and Seaborn. The purpose of this blog is really just show you how versatile things get when you're using tools, a data lakehouse, especially with tools like Spark, Dremio, Nessie. You can have one copy of your data set and kind of really use it across all these different tools. Okay, the link to this article will be in the video description, but as I go through, but basically to start this off, what we want to do is we want to set up our environment, so I can just use our cool table of contents here to kind of skip to that section where we're going to set up our environment. There's a lot of, in this article, it really tries to spend a lot of time kind of explaining all the concepts and technologies throughout. So this is a great blog for a beginner to Apache Iceberg and a lot of these technologies who really kind of wants that thorough explanation. But basically what we do is we're going to start off by cloning this repo. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to this repo on GitHub. Okay, so this is a repo I created. And I set this up as a template repo. The reason being is that you might want to make your own copy, customize it, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. So what you do is you click over here on Use This Template, and you're going to click on Create a New Repository. Okay, and I will do this. So this will be the third time I've ran through this. So I am going to use that name, Dremio Spark Example 3. And now in my GitHub account, so you have to have a GitHub account, I'm creating a copy of this repository. So now I have this copy. You can edit it, change it however you like, do what you want with it. Now what I want to do is copy it to my computer, aka cloning it to my computer. So I can get that URL to clone it. Now, I have set up SSH security with my GitHub account, so I'm going to use the SSH link. If you haven't set up SSH, and if you're unsure, you probably haven't, then you would want to use the HTTPS link when cloning the GitHub repo. Okay, so basically I'm going to choose this SSH link right here, copy that over, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my file system. So here's my file system. Here's an empty folder that I want to work in. And I'm going to right click. I'm using a Linux machine currently, by the way, but generally you should see the same kind of workflow, whether it's a Windows or a Mac. Okay, the only thing is on Windows, make sure you have Git installed. Other precursors you'll need installed for this exercise are Git and Docker. If you have Git and Docker installed, you should be able to do everything in this exercise, no problem. So I'm going to open up a instance of terminal. Okay, so again, on Mac, this should still be called terminal. If it's on Windows, it might be referred to as like PowerShell, unless you installed something like a Git bash that allows you to use a bash terminal on Windows. Okay, but here I am. So basically, I'm in the folder, that workspace 2 folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to clone that repo. So I'm going to do git clone, and then I'm going to paste that URL. Okay, and again, since I'm in terminal, I can't really do Control-C, so it's Control-Shift-C, in case you're wondering, or you can just right-click and paste in there. Okay, so I'm going to copy that repo into there. And you can see here, the repo was created in that folder. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over into that folder, so cd Dremio Spark Example 3. And I can see that now I'm inside that folder. And if I were to go here into my file explorer and take a look at what's in there, I can see that there's this README, this Docker Compose.yaml, and I could theoretically continue to work straight out of this Docker Compose or straight out of this terminal and do everything I need to do out of this terminal. No, actually I will. I'll just continue to do that. Usually I prefer working out of Visual Studio Code, but not everybody has Visual Studio Code, so just to demonstrate, this can work out of any terminal emulator. But let's just show you what's in these files. So I want to show you what's inside this Docker Compose YAML file. So what I can do is I can do cat docker compose.yaml, and you can see that this will show you the contents of that file, which is just basically all the details for our environment. So all the details for how Dremio should be set up, how Spark should be set up, how Minio and Nessie should be set up. I have this all kind of already tailored for our needs today, so you don't need to change anything. Exactly what all these configurations mean are in the blog, so you can refer to the blog to kind of get a better idea of how this file is set up and how it works. But basically, because I have that file in there, I can just use the command docker compose up, and what it's going to do is just going to spin up the environment that I've detailed in this file. So I can just hit docker compose up. Okay, and right now it's spinning up. For you, if it's the first time you do this, it might take a little bit longer because it has to download those images. from Docker Hub, which is sort of the place where you can share Docker images. I already have those images downloaded, so it got started up pretty quickly. So you can see here now it's now logging all the output from all the different tools that I'm running, Nessie, Dremio, so forth. So I'm going to just move this to the side. I no longer need this. Okay, so I can just move that off. That's just going to run. It's running all that stuff. And let's just confirm that it's all running. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to confirm that Minio is running. Again, Minio is a storage platform, so that's going to act as our data lake where we store all our data files. Okay, localhost 9001. Okay, and if it's running fine, you should see this screen when you go to localhost. If you're unfamiliar, localhost represents your computer. So the idea is that we have these applications running directly from our computer. So I'm saying, hey, on my computer, localhost, I have a program running on port 9001. And there's like 65,000 possible ports. Why that number has to do with data types and, different types of integers. Not going to get into it right now. Okay? But localhost 9001. Now, according to my YAML config, and just to kind of show it to you, so I might as well open up VS Code so you can actually get a better look at that YAML file. So I'm going to open up VS Code. Okay. You can see here that I specified what the password for Minio is going to be, user admin password. And you'll notice that there's these seed files. So this if you want to actually put any data in this Minio cluster ahead of time, you can put it in this Minio data folder, and that data will become available to your container. So if you want to put like some Parquet files, some CSV files, some JSON files to do some work with, that's how you would do that. Okay, but going back to over here, I'll try that out. Admin password. And you'll see there's already 4 buckets created. Okay, that's not typically the case. Again, this is all set up for you in this Docker Compose file. So you can see here I have some commands that run when the container starts up that basically creates these containers for you and copies over the seed data. Okay, again, just so you can understand how this whole environment is structured. Okay, but good. Now I know my data lake is up and running. Okay, next what I want to do is just make sure that Dremio is up and running. So there's going to be localhost 9047. That's where Dremio will be running. Okay, and give that a moment. Yep, and Dremio is running. So what you have to do is you have to set up your user. So we're going to say Alex Merced. Well, actually, that's first name, last name. So Alex Merced. Alex Merced username, email, alex.merced@Dremio. Password, we'll just do password 2024 with an uppercase P. Password 2024. Okay, cool. And now we are in our space. We can connect. Now this is basically the next step would be to connect data sources. Okay. Now we'll come back to this. But first, what I want to do is also check out to see if our Spark container is running. Okay, so if I head over here to localhost 8888, we should have a notebook server running, and those notebooks should have access to Spark. Okay, awesome. So there's our notebook server. Now, the last thing I have to check is whether the Nessie server is running. Okay, so we do have a setting up the environment. In the Minio, verifying that the services are running. That's where I want to check. Verifying Nessie. What we can do to check that Nessie is running, because Nessie doesn't have a UI, so you're not going to see like a visual UI with Nessie. It's just running kind of there in the background. But I know it exists because I can send it a quick request using a tool called curl that should be pretty much pre-installed on most computers, on most operating systems. So I can go back to my terminal. So I'll bring back my terminal for a moment. Now, I don't want to stop this process because right now this is running my... So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click over here to create another tab. Most terminal software should allow you to create multiple tabs. And I'm just going to paste that command. Okay, and that should be sending a request to the Nessie server that's running on port 19120. And I should get a response like this, showing you the list of possible branches that exist in your Nessie server, which confirms that Nessie is running. Wonderful. So with that, we can now begin doing the exercise. So we've already kind of verified that everything is nice up and working. So the next thing I'm going to want to do, so again, just break all this stuff. This is a really long article, so Verifying all that. So next thing we want to do is ingest data. So we're going to ingest data into Spark. Okay, so we're going to create a, this is a good point. Now there's something that's weird about the way the DNS for the Minio container always works relative to the Spark server. Okay, really just for Spark you have to do this, and just for the Minio container, we do need to get that Minio container's IP address. Okay, now if I go back to VS Code for a moment, every service, which is each container that's running, so Nessie has a name, Minio has a name, so I name them in this file. Okay, so again, this Docker compose file really kind of dictates everything about this environment. Okay, so I can call them by name. Okay, so in this terminal, so I have a terminal built into VS Code. You can use the standalone terminal, but I can actually just run docker inspect and then use the name of that container. So I can say docker inspect Minio. Okay, and that's going to return me the information of the current container that's running under the name Minio. And what I want is that IP address. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I'm going to need that in a moment. Okay, and then this is the script that's going to run. Okay, so I can just copy this right over. And I can just put that right here into Jupyter Lab. Okay, and essentially the only thing I need to replace is right here. This IP address needs to be the Minio IP address, which we just got by running that docker inspect command. So I'm going to copy that over. Wonderful. Okay, otherwise everything else is pretty much set and good as is. So so what this is just setting up some of the settings. So again, just where the Nessie server is located, the URL for the Nessie server, which bucket in Minio we're going to be using, and the location of that Minio server. Now these settings right here, these configure Iceberg. So what I'm doing is I'm configuring an Iceberg catalog in the Spark session. So the idea is you got to think of Spark as there's a session, meaning, hey, there's a time when I'm doing work. And what I need to do is create a configuration for that session. Okay, this will determine sort of what catalogs exist during that session. And I can refer to those catalogs during that session. So I'm saying, hey, during this session that's about to start up, I want there to be a catalog named Nessie. And then these are the configurations for that catalog. Okay, so basically, you can go through each of these settings individually later on. They're detailed in the blog, but essentially they set up this catalog called Nessie that tracks our Iceberg tables. Then we pass that configuration and create and start our session. So our session starts here, and essentially what we're going to do is we're going to create a schema for our new Iceberg table. We're going to create some sample data for that new Iceberg table as a data frame in Spark. And then what we're going to do is create a namespace, because generally we're going to want to organize our tables under different names. This is like the same logic as if you ever use any database and you can create, or any database system like a Postgres or MySQL, and you created multiple databases within there because you want to organize certain tables under one database and other tables under another database. It's the same logic, it's just referred to as a namespace here. And later on in Dremio, it'll be referred to as a folder. Okay, but I can create a namespace, and I'm just basically saying, hey, under the Nessie catalog, there is essentially a folder or a namespace or a database called sales. Okay, and that's just going to be another way to organize the tables I'm about to create. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a table under that namespace called sales data raw. That is the result of that data frame we created earlier. And then we're going to just query that data set real quick just to confirm that we created it. And then that's that. So now what I can do is I can hit play here to run this cell. And this is going to take a second, because the first time you run this, basically in these configurations right here, we have to tell Spark to download. So the Spark cluster needs to download all these libraries in order to do everything right. So these are libraries telling how Nessie works, how Iceberg works. Okay. I also notice I have a Postgres one in there because I copied this over from a different blog where I access Postgres, but that's fine. Okay. But basically it's downloading all those libraries and getting all configured. So we're going to give that a moment to do that. Okay. In the meantime, I'm going to head back over to Dremio, and I'm going to set up our first source. So right now I'm going to connect all that seed data. So remember I mentioned there's like 4 buckets in Minio. One of them is seed. So I'm going to set up that bucket as a source. So I'm going to click Add Source. Now Minio is a S3 compatible data source. So I would just use the Amazon S3 connector. And we'll just call this seed, will be the name of the source. Now I would use AWS access key, and I would just use my Minio username and password, admin password. I'm going to decrypt the connection, because again, this is all running on my laptop, so it's not encrypted, or there's no SSL certificates running on my laptop. So once I have that set up, we're good. Now I'm going to head over to advanced options. I'm going to choose compatibility mode because we're running with a S3 compatible storage, not with S3 itself. Here I can specify which bucket. So I'm going to say, hey, the seed bucket is where I want this source to point to. And then I set up some properties. Particularly, I need to set up path style access. This has to do with the URLs that it uses when it makes API calls to Minio. It's basically saying that the name of the bucket will be in the path, not as a subdomain, which is the default for S3. So I set up that, and I say, yeah, that's true, I want that. And then for name, I want to set up endpoint, and I'm going to set up Minio. So here I don't need the IP address because Dremio, the DNS, resolves just fine. So I can just say Minio 9000, which is the name of that service and the port that it's running on. And that should be it. I hit save. And again, all this is detailed in the blog. And there's the sample data that I had in there. It was just a test CSV, but I can run this. So again, Dremio can run queries on lots of different data, including just CSV. So I can go here and say, hey, here's a CSV. I'd like to extract the column names. Save. And now I can just run SQL queries right there on that CSV file, like I could run SQL queries on anything else. See, cool. Okay. So just showing you a little bit of what you can do with Dremio. Okay. Now let's go back to Spark, see if Spark finished the job. So if I go down here, I see that it downloaded everything. And yeah, when you see this just means it completed the thing, but it returned an empty data frame. Okay, so this is when we created the table. Okay, and then here we see that we created the table successfully, and the idea is that you notice that there's some mistakes in the data. Okay, so you might notice that there's some duplicate IDs, there's some nulls. Okay, this is not perfect data. Okay, we're going to clean that up. But bottom line is I'm going to ingest this data as just raw data into my Iceberg catalog. But the cool thing is that Iceberg catalog I can bring over to Dremio, and then with Dremio I can then virtually model it. So instead of having to make additional tables, I can virtually model and do all that cleanup work without duplicating the data. So to do that, I'm going to connect my catalog, which is Nessie. So here's our Nessie connector. Okay, and then again we'll just call this Nessie. Endpoint will be HTTP Nessie API v2. Again, I didn't set up any authentication in Nessie for my environment, so no authentication. Now, you can actually have different backing stores for Nessie, so your data could be stored on AWS, Azure, Google. Again, we're using an S3 compatible store in Minio, so I'm going to use AWS. And again, this time I'm going to use that same bucket that I used when I was in Spark Warehouse. Again, we're going to put our information here, admin, password. Okay, and then I just have to set up those connection properties again. So 1, we need that path style access, yes. 3, we need to set that endpoint, Minio 9000. And in here, I have to set up the compatibility mode here by setting true. And then again, I don't want to encrypt the connection. And that's it. Okay, once I have those settings in place, I now have access to Nessie. And look, there's that table that I wrote in Spark. Okay, so that's the table that you just saw me write in Spark. I can now see it in Dremio. That's the beauty of Iceberg, that I can immediately see the changes that are happening in one engine and another engine because we're all working off the same data. Okay, which makes life a lot easier. And the cool thing about Dremio is that, theoretically, I could join that data with that CSV file, and over here in my object storage, I can connect all sorts of different data sources in Dremio to make wherever my data is, harmonious. So you can see there's lots of different data you can connect to Dremio and run queries against it right here. Now in this case, again, we just wanted to kind of clean up that sales data. So if I go over here, I can query that sales data. Okay, and see I'm querying that same table that we queried in Spark, but I'm querying it here in Dremio, and you can see there it is. Okay, there's the data, and I want to clean that up. Okay, now we do have, and again, this is all running off my laptop, so literally this is pushing my laptop to its edge, running all this software simultaneously. But the cool thing is that it still works pretty well, and yeah, you can do a lot of work just right here from your laptop like this. But now what I want to do, going back to, we already ingested the data. We saw that. Now just to show you, might as well go show you that the data is there. So if I head over to Minio again, so I'll go back to Minio, and you'll notice that if I go to the warehouse, here's that sales table, and I can see all the data files with the data. Okay. I can see the metadata for the table, so I can see that, like, hey, things are actually happening in my object storage. Just this data is being written, it's existing. Cool. But, and then let's also confirm that Nessie got it, so we can do that. Well, you can already see that in Nessie the table exists, so that kind of confirms it right there. And let's go back to the blog and find where we do the next step. Here we go. We did this. Connecting. Here we go. We did this. We did that. Here we go. Cleaning the raw data into Silver. Okay, so this query is going to be what we're going to want to run. Okay, this will clean up all the duplicates, get rid of the nulls, do all that fun stuff. Okay, so I can go here in Dremio, and again, I can figure that out. Basically, I have this nice little function lookup to look up all the different functions in Dremio pretty easily. I have like light mode, dark mode, there's auto suggest, a lot of really kind of nice quality of life features here. Okay, and if you're not a big SQL user, there are features to help you do a lot of that SQL stuff without having to know SQL, whether it's you need to add a column to a data set, do group bys and joins, all that fun stuff. And if you're using Dremio Cloud, there's also the text to SQL where you can actually use generative AI to generate your queries. So you can see here, here's our query. Let me just look it over, make sure there's nothing that I want to edit. Nope, looks good to me. So now I can run this query. Cool. And there I go. There's my data is now been deduped and cleaned up. So that looks a lot nicer. That looks a lot better. Good. So now what I want to do is save this view. So here's my cleaned up, prepared view, aka my silver layer. Okay, or your preparation layer. Depends on what terminology you use, but it's generally the same idea. There's always 3 layers. Your first layer is your raw. The second layer is after where you clean up the data. And then your gold layer or your third layer is generally where you start putting together applying your business logic and your metrics. Okay, that's generally always sort of the mantra. So I can click over here and I could save the script if I wanted to run the script and use it as like a template for future queries, or I could save it as a view. And I can save it as a view in my Nessie catalog. So in that same sales folder, I can now save this as sales data silver. Okay, cool. So now I've created this data set, sales data silver. Okay. And that's going to run the query on it. So there's my clean data. So now when I go over here and take a look at all my data sets, I can click on Nessie, click on sales, and I see sales, there it is. And again, the green means it's a view. So it's not a copy. It's a logical view of the original data. So at this point, I've created no additional copies of my data, but I can continue like sort of doing this modeling. So now what I want to do is take that silver data set. Okay, and I'm going to turn this into essentially a metric, we'll say aka gold. Again, this is a very sort of overly abstracted example just to kind of illustrate a point. But I'll go back over here, find our query for our gold. Okay, which is going to be this right here. Which is going to give us a couple aggregate metrics. So I will paste that here. Okay. And again, that's just going to come up with all our sums. And let's see there, we can see total orders, total quantity sold, total sales, average sales per order, all of our metrics by product. Okay, so now what I can do is I can save that view as, again, save that in the sales folder and call that sales data gold. And again, this doesn't have to be done in the UI. This could all be automated using things like Airflow and DBT, because you can actually send, like if you're, one, you can use DBT, so you can just use SQL in a DBT project. I have other videos where I walk through using DBT with Dremio. You could use Airflow to automate REST API calls or other type of ways of interacting with Dremio. You'll see one example very soon. But yeah, so there basically, but again, I go over here, I go into my Nessie catalog, and I can see my library of views and tables, okay? Which is pretty cool. And then again, it works both ways. That's the beauty of Iceberg. I could go create another table. So I'll sit here and say, let's create a namespace. But except here in Dremio, it's create folder. So I'll say create folder Nessie.dremio. So we can signify that it's a table made in Dremio. Okay, and then I'm going to create a table called Nessie.dremio.names. That is just one column called name, which is a varchar. Then after we do that, what I want to do is insert into Nessie.dremio.names, and it's going to be values like Merced. Okay, so I have my queries, and the cool thing is I can, in Dremio here, I can set up multiple queries to all run within sort of one session here in the UI. That's a pretty cool thing, and again, to do. So I can hit run, and then there we go, create folder, create table, insert into, nice. Okay, and so now all these tables have ran, and again, I can always go back to Minio to just double check. So if I go back to my list of go back to warehouse, see there's the Dremio namespace, and then there's the names table that we just created, and you can see all the metadata there. And if I were to go back to Spark, I'm going to copy all this configuration stuff for the Spark session. And if I were to create another notebook, what I could do is I could actually go query that table. Oops, I want to, well, just did nothing. That's fine. Spark.sql, and that'd be like select star from Nessie.dremio.names. So there's the query, and then we use the .show to show the results. Okay, and if I run this, we should see the results and see that, hey, that same table, doesn't matter where I wrote it, I can see it by different engines. That's the beauty of Iceberg. These tables are portable. I can write them with any tool and then read them with any tool. Okay, and there's a table. Okay, so that names table that I just wrote with Dremio was immediately available and visible in Spark without me having to do anything special. How cool is that? Okay, cool. Now, another cool thing you can do is you can query the data from Dremio. So going back to Dremio, what if I want to access that gold version of the data and create a visualization of that gold visual I made? Okay, now Dremio has 3 ways you can connect to it from any kind of language, technically. REST API, so there's a REST API in which you can send SQL and retrieve results. There is 2, a JDBC ODBC connectivity, so you can use the JDBC ODBC drivers to connect with your favorite JDBC ODBC tools, and which also is the basis for most of our integrations with different BI tools. And then there's our Apache Arrow Flight connectivity, Apache Arrow being a project that's all about making things faster for analytical data, whether it's how we represent the data in memory or how we transfer between machines. Apache Arrow Flight is particularly the protocol for transferring data between machines and doing it so in a super fast way. Okay, and I can use that. Okay, and there's actually a library that I wrote called Dremio Simple Query that just abstracts a lot of this to make it a lot easier to just connect and get it done. So let's go over here. I have a snippet for that. This should be all the way here at the end. Yep, here it is. Okay. Copy. Okay, let's go back to our notebook, create another notebook. And the cool thing about this is that when you're querying Dremio, it doesn't have to be Iceberg tables. So this could be anything you've connected to Dremio, I can now use in this fashion that I'm about to show you right here. So I could have Postgres tables. I can connect Snowflake, I can connect Redshift, I can connect, here, let me just go back to that list of like sources. Okay, so if I go back to here, to Dremio, add source, any of these sources can be connected to Dremio. Okay, Vertica, SQL Server, Druid, Snowflake, Postgres, Oracle. I can connect any of this stuff and join it together, create all these views on the data. So as you saw, as I did here, I created these views on the data, and those views become, I can just send queries to Dremio and say, hey, I want to query that view, and deliver that data to my notebook. So in here, what I'm doing, okay, so in this case, I have to put in my username and password for Dremio, which I set up as Alex Merced, and password 2024 when we set it up. Okay, all this other stuff should stay pretty much the same. Okay. Although I just realized that's not part of the code. So I'll need to fix that in the blog, which I will. Okay. Yeah, I gotta fix the way that copied over. Okay, cool. Okay, but let's just kind of walk through it. So essentially all I'm doing is I'm giving my information to log into Dremio based on the cluster. It's going to go hit the URL, okay, of the Dremio REST API to get the token. So then I'm going to pass the URL to Dremio, so arrow flight endpoint, and the token over to this library. Again, this Dremio connection object is from that library I mentioned, Dremio Simple Query. And there you have a tool that you can use to connect. And the cool thing is that this Dremio connection has a bunch of functions built into it. So there's like 2 pandas, 2 polars, 2 DuckDB. So whatever your preferred way of working with data in Python, you can then convert it to that. So if you, in this case, I'm using polars. I'm converted it into a polars data frame. So it's querying Dremio, getting the result from Dremio, and then returning me a polars data frame of that result. But I could do the same thing with DuckDB and the same thing with polars, pandas, or just get back the raw arrow data stream. All that's in the documentation for Dremio Simple Query. Okay, so it's running that query, I'm getting that polars data frame, and then I'm taking that polars data frame and creating a visualization using a library called Seaborn. Okay, and if I hit play, we should see the result. And there it is. Okay, so see, we got the data, and then we created a visualization off of it. And this is off the gold data. So again, I didn't make a second copy of that table, but I was able to pre-construct the gold version of my data, which made it much easier. When I brought it here into this notebook, I didn't have to go back and do all that cleanup work here. The cleanup work was already done. Okay, and so anybody else who needs to use that data, the cleanup work is already done for them because the data has already been pre-cleaned and then pre-turned into the metric that they need. So now I can just pull the data and visualize it, which makes my life a lot easier. And you can imagine again how this value gets maximized when you're working across several different data sets and you're modeling them and curating them and all that into these views that you can then just pull into wherever you need. Okay, but yeah, that's pretty much how this exercise works. Again, the link to the blog will be in the video description. And then also, let's see here, to shut off the Docker Compose environment, okay, all you have to do is just do Docker Compose down. Now, I usually like to do Docker Compose down with a -v. That also makes sure that it removes any volumes it may have created while I did that. But that's it. Okay, now it's going to take down Dremio, Nessie, Spark, Minio, and yeah, it's like nothing ever happened. Okay, and that's how simple it is to try this out on your laptop. You can actually just spin up this environment to do actual work. If you just try to do some small ingestion jobs or analytics jobs right from your laptop, you could spin up this environment on your laptop and just use it to do actual work if you want. I've done that, where I have a Parquet data set that I just really want to quickly run some analytics on. I'll just spin up the Dremio Docker container, load up the data set, and have at it to make my life easier. And the possibilities are endless. Okay, so yeah. If you guys want to learn more, the information will be in the video description. But thank you very much for watching this. I'll see you all later. Have a great day and enjoy.